Once upon a time, in a busy little village, lived a couple named Zara and Ben. They had a small, simple home, not fancy at all, but filled with love. Zara was a lovely woman, with a kind smile that brightened every room, and Ben was strong and handsome. They were happy because they had 4 beautiful daughters, each one like a little jewel, bright and full of life. But Zara and Ben were very poor. Every day, Ben worked really hard on other people's farms to earn enough money so they could eat. It wasn't much, but they were grateful for whatever they had. Zara also helped by fetching water, washing clothes for others, and carrying goods to the market, just to make a little more money for their family. Still, despite all their hard work, life was difficult. The girls were growing up and needed school supplies like books and pencils, but it was hard for Zara and Ben to pay for these things. Sometimes the girls would come home early from school because they couldn't pay the fees, which made Zara and Ben sad. But they always hugged their daughters, played with them, and tried to make each day as happy as possible. Their house was always full of laughter and the sound of little feet running around. Though they didn't have much, Zara and Ben loved each other and their daughters deeply. They believed that someday things would get better, though they didn't know how. Every night, under the twinkling stars, Zara and Ben would sit outside their house, hold hands, and dream of a better future for their daughters. One sunny morning, Ben felt a heavy burden in his heart. He knew he needed to find a way to improve things for his family, so he decided to visit a friend in the nearby village, hoping for help. He walked a long way under the blue sky, thinking about his wife and daughters. When he reached his friend's house, he was greeted warmly. Ben explained the tough times they were going through and asked, "Can you help me with some money?" His friend listened carefully and said, "Ben, I won't just give you money, I'll show you how to never be in need again." Ben didn't fully understand but agreed, hopeful for good news. His friend took him to meet an old man who lived deep in the forest, known as the healer. The healer's house was strange, covered in odd symbols, and surrounded by unusual plants. Ben felt uneasy as he stepped inside. The air smelled of herbs and something else he couldn't quite name. The healer listened to Ben's story with a twinkle in his eyes and said, "I can make you very rich, but there's a cost." Ben, eager to know more, asked, "What do I have to do?" The healer looked at him seriously and said, "You must use your children in the ritual. They won't die, but they will suffer." Ben was horrified. "I can't do that," he said. "I want the money to give my children a better life, not to harm them. I'd rather stay poor than do this to my own daughters." But the healer gave a chilling warning. "Now, as you know, if you refuse, you won't make it back home safely." Scared and feeling trapped, Ben thought about the unpaid school fees, the empty dinner pots, and their little house. With a heavy heart, he agreed, hoping it wouldn't be as bad as it seemed. The healer gave him a black powder and told him to mix it into his children's food. Ben left the healer's house with the small black pouch, but as he walked home, the weight of his decision felt heavier than anything he had ever carried before. When he finally returned, the dark path he had chosen still haunted him. Ben was quiet and sad after he did what the healer had told him. He mixed a bit of the black powder into his daughter's food, praying with all his heart that it wouldn't harm them. He hoped that somehow, everything would turn out okay. But the next day, something strange and terrible happened. A strong wind blew through the village, almost like it was angry. It wasn't just any wind. It howled and shook doors and trees, making everyone talk about how strange it was. But for Ben's family, the wind brought something worse. His eldest daughter, the one with the brightest smile, suddenly lost her sight. She couldn't see anything anymore. She cried, saying everything was dark. Ben's heart broke into a million pieces. He tried to convince himself it was just an accident, maybe caused by the wind, but deep down he knew it was because of the black powder. People in the village whispered about the strange wind and how Ben's daughter had suddenly gone blind. Then, on a quiet day, a mysterious man arrived in the village. He wore all black, from his hat to his boots, and carried a heavy sack. Without a word, he walked straight to Ben's house. His steps were quick and silent. He told Ben and Zara that he had heard about their daughter's trouble and had come to help. "Don't open this sack until I leave," the man said, with a strange smile that didn't seem friendly. Ben and Zara, confused but hopeful, watched the man walk away. Once he was gone, they opened the sack and found it full of shiny gold coins. For a moment, they forgot all their worries. They laughed, danced around, and hugged each other, thinking their problems were finally over. Maybe the healer's deal wasn't so bad after all, they thought. But as the sunlight reflected off the coins, Zara looked at their daughter, still blind, and felt a deep sadness. The man had brought them wealth, but the strange wind had taken something far more valuable. Ben tried to comfort her, saying it was just a strange twist of fate, but deep down, he knew the truth. The money had come at a terrible price, a price his wife knew nothing about. With the bag of gold, Ben and Zara's lives changed completely. They bought big farms and the largest shop in the market. Their home was no longer small and simple. It became a big, beautiful house with many rooms. Ben and Zara were now rich, and everyone in the village admired them. Their daughters also enjoyed their new, luxurious life, wearing beautiful clothes and having the finest things. They never went hungry, and people in the village started calling them princesses because of their fancy lifestyle. But even with all the wealth and comfort, there was still sadness in their home. Ben's eldest daughter remained blind. Zara often begged Ben to use some of the money to take her to a healer, but Ben always said, "It's her destiny, we can't change it." Zara felt sad for her daughter, but she trusted Ben and believed he knew what was best. The villagers sometimes whispered about the blind girl, wondering why Ben wouldn't try to help her. But no one dared to ask him directly. So, while the family enjoyed their wealth, there was always a shadow of sorrow in their hearts. Ben and Zara tried to focus on their good fortune, but deep down, they knew their happiness had come at a great cost. 2 years passed, and Ben and Zara continued to live a life of luxury. Their farms prospered, and their shop was the biggest in the market. Their daughters had everything they could ever want. But the memory of the first sacrifice still haunted them. Then one day, Ben received a message from the healer. He knew what it meant. The time had come to pay again. With a heavy heart, Ben went to see the healer, who told him that to keep his wealth, the next sacrifice had to be his second daughter. Ben felt his heart drop. He didn't want to harm another child, but the healer warned him again. If he didn't make the sacrifice, he would lose all his wealth and go mad. Ben felt trapped. After a lot of fear and hesitation, he agreed. He returned home with a heavy heart and once again mixed the black powder into his daughter's food. The next morning, his second daughter lost her ability to speak and hear. She had become both deaf and mute. The family was devastated, and Zara cried for their child. But Ben repeated what he had said before, "It's her destiny." He tried to comfort Zara, but the sadness in their home only grew. A few days later, the same mysterious man dressed in black showed up at their door. This time, he said he was traveling and asked if he could stay the night. By morning, he was gone, but he left behind another large sack of money. Ben and Zara opened it to find more gold. Once again, they were rich. Zara begged Ben to use some of the money to help their second daughter, but he refused, saying it was her fate and that nothing could be done. Zara began to feel suspicious, but she didn't know what to believe. The family continued to live in luxury, but now 2 of their daughters were suffering. Ben and Zara tried to enjoy their wealth, but the price they had paid weighed heavily on their hearts. The same pattern kept repeating. Ben would visit the healer, one of their daughters would suffer a new affliction, and then the man in black would appear with more gold. With each cycle, the family's riches grew, but so did the silence in their home. The laughter that once filled their house became rare, and smiles felt forced. Zara noticed how her once playful and happy daughters now moved quietly through their days, burdened by something too heavy for their young lives. She also noticed how Ben's once bright eyes had grown darker, shadowed by the secrets he kept and the deals he made. Zara started to feel that something was terribly wrong. She couldn't understand why their daughters were suffering so much while they had so much money. Ben's refusal to help their children only made her more suspicious. One day, Zara decided to find out the truth. She quietly followed Ben as he left their home, hiding behind trees and bushes to stay out of sight. Ben walked to the healer's hut, and Zara watched from a distance. Inside, Ben and the healer spoke in low voices. Zara crept closer, listening carefully. Her heart pounded as she heard them talk about the sacrifices Ben had made. She realized that it was Ben who had caused their daughter's suffering, using them in rituals to gain more wealth. Zara was horrified. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man she loved, the father of her children, had done something so terrible. She felt a mix of anger, sadness, and fear. She wanted to run away and tell everyone, but she was too scared. The healer had warned Ben that if the truth came out, both of them would go mad. When Ben left the hut, Zara quickly hid. She watched him walk home, his steps heavy with guilt. Zara stayed behind for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. She knew she couldn't tell anyone without putting herself and her children in danger. Zara returned home with a heavy heart, looking at her daughters and feeling deep sadness for what they had endured. She knew she had to find a way to protect her last healthy daughter, but she felt powerless. Zara decided to keep the terrible secret, hoping that one day she could find a way to make things right. Time passed, and although the family's wealth remained, the cost weighed heavily on Zara's heart. Then, one day, Ben was summoned by the healer again. Zara's heart sank. She knew what this meant. At the healer's hut, Ben was told it was time for another ritual to renew their wealth. This time, the sacrifice had to be their last healthy daughter. Ben felt a deep sense of dread. He couldn't bring himself to harm his last daughter. After another long sleepless night, he came home with a heavy heart and a limp. Zara noticed his discomfort and finally decided to confront him. "I know where you went. You went to see the healer. What happened, Ben?" she asked, her voice trembling with fear. Ben sat down, his face full of guilt and pain. "The healer," he began in a whisper, "he says we need to do more to keep our wealth. It's another ritual, a terrible one." Zara's heart sank. She cried and begged Ben not to go through with it. Desperate to save their last daughter, Zara decided to visit the healer herself. She went to his hut, fell to her knees, and pleaded, "Please, there must be another way. I can't let you take my last child." The healer thought for a long time before speaking. "There is another way," he said slowly, "but it will bring great suffering to both of you." Zara listened carefully as the healer explained. "We will make a wound on Ben's leg. You, Zara, must lick this wound every day. As long as you do this, your wealth will remain. But if you ever tell anyone about this, you will die." Zara felt a chill run through her. The thought of licking a wound was disgusting, but losing her daughter was unbearable. She looked at Ben, who reluctantly nodded. They both knew they had no other choice. The next day, the healer made a deep and painful wound on Ben's leg. Ben winced in agony, and Zara braced herself before licking the wound, tears streaming down her face. She did this every day, and as promised, their wealth continued to grow. The man in black returned more frequently, bringing bags of money. The family became richer than ever, but Ben and Zara knew their fortune was built on a terrible secret. Zara endured the daily ritual, her heart heavy with sadness and disgust. She did it to protect her children, hoping to keep them from further harm. Even though they lived in luxury, the weight of what they had done hung over them like a dark cloud. Ben and Zara were now bound by their secret, and each day was a painful reminder of the price they had paid for their wealth. As time passed, their house became filled with shiny new things, almost like a treasure chest. But despite all the riches, there was a deep sadness that filled the air. It felt like, even though they had everything, they really had nothing at all. Every morning, Zara had to do the difficult task of licking the wound on Ben's leg, which never healed. Each time she did it, she felt sicker and sadder. Her bright eyes lost their sparkle, and no matter how much she bathed, a terrible smell seemed to stick to her, coming from the darkness of the wound. People in the village started whispering about Zara. When she walked by, they'd say, "Something's wrong with Zara." The children who once ran up to her with smiles now stayed far away, making faces because of the bad smell. Zara became very lonely. Her friends stopped visiting, and Ben felt deep sadness too. He could see how sick Zara was getting, and it hurt him because he knew it was all due to the choices he had made. The house became a sad and heavy place, the air thick with sorrow. Zara's daily task made her feel worse and worse, and she missed the happy times they once had. Their daughters were scared and confused, often whispering to each other at night, "What's happening to Mama?" They didn't understand why their mother was changing, why she looked so tired and sad. As Zara's health worsened, the village kept their distance. Though the family had plenty of money, it felt like they were trapped in a golden cage, cut off from everyone else. The bad smell and the weight of their secrets were too much to bear. Ben felt a deep sense of dread. He didn't want to harm his last daughter. After another restless night, he returned home, looking tired and in pain. Zara noticed his troubled look and decided to confront him. "I know where you went. You went to see the healer. What happened, Ben?" she asked, her voice shaking with fear. Ben sat down, his face full of guilt. "The healer," he whispered. "He says we need to do more to keep our wealth. It's another terrible ritual." Zara was scared, fearing the worst. She cried and begged him not to do it. Desperate to save their last daughter, Zara went to see the healer herself. She knelt before the healer and begged, "Please, there must be another way. I can't let you take my last child." The healer thought for a moment before saying, "There is another way, but it will bring great suffering to both of you." Zara listened carefully as he explained. "We will make a wound on Ben's leg. You, Zara, must lick it every day. As long as you do this, your wealth will stay. But if you ever tell anyone, you will die." The thought of licking a wound was awful, but losing her daughter was worse. She looked at Ben, who nodded. They had no choice. The healer made a painful wound on Ben's leg, and Zara began the terrible task of licking it each day. Their wealth continued to grow, but Zara grew sicker and sadder. The villagers started to notice a bad smell around her, and they whispered about it. One day, the village elders, worried about Zara, gathered under the big tree in the village. They couldn't ignore how sick she was getting. The oldest elder stood up and said, "We need to find out what's happening. Something is wrong." With heavy steps, they went to Ben and Zara's house and demanded that Ben take Zara to a healer. Ben tried to say it was just an illness that would pass, but the elders didn't believe him. They sent men to bring Zara to the healer. The men found Zara weak and sick, and they gently carried her to the middle of the village. Ben tried to stop them, but they tied him up to keep him from interfering. At the healer's place, the villagers gathered to learn the truth. The healer started her rituals, chanting and waving her hands over Zara and Ben. She looked at them sharply and said, "Tell us what you've done. The truth must come out." Ben and Zara were scared, but they couldn't hide anymore. Ben confessed, "I used our daughters for rituals. The healer told me to do it, and I agreed. I put black powder in their food, and that's why they suffered." Zara, crying, added, "I licked the wound on Ben's leg every day to keep our wealth. I did it to save our last daughter, but I got sick because of it." The villagers were shocked by what they heard. Then, something miraculous happened. Their eldest daughter, who had been blind, could suddenly see again. Their second daughter, who had been deaf and mute, could hear and speak. Their third daughter, who had been sick, became healthy. The villagers were amazed but also angry. The village elders stood up and said, "Ben, for your terrible actions, you will be punished. You brought great suffering to your family and our village." Suddenly, Ben screamed and ran mad, tearing at his clothes and disappearing into the forest, never to be seen again. The elders then turned to Zara and said, "You should have spoken up sooner. You've caused pain by keeping this secret. You are banished from the village." Zara cried and begged for forgiveness, but the elders stood firm. She left the village, her heart heavy with sorrow, hoping her daughters would forgive her one day. The villagers, filled with compassion, took care of Zara's daughters, raising them as their own. They made sure the girls were happy and healthy, surrounded by love and support. And so, the story of Ben and Zara came to an end, leaving behind an important lesson. The pursuit of wealth at the cost of family and honesty leads to great suffering. True happiness comes from love, truth, and caring for one another. The village thrived, and the tale of Ben and Zara was told for generations, reminding everyone of what truly matters in life. I hope you liked the story. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, and leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss more magical stories like this. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.